you have to go out several hours before the flight and get your station set up and run all the tests. So you, back on the Aerobee program, you probably had to go out at least 6 hours before the launch, and then you had to stay out late a lot of times for the tests that you ran. But it was a normal day if it wasn't scheduled for a flight. If you just had to go out and maintain your stations, it was normal. Started about 8 till around 4:30, something like that. Between the buildings, they had walkways which were enclosed. So in real bad weather, you didn't have to get out in the weather. You never had to get out in the weather at all. You were always in a building. So walk from one building to the next building in those covered walkways. The facilities were great down at the base, but on the launch side, let me tell you, that honey bucket wasn't so good. Well, they had a movie theater there. They had a bar. They had a lounge. They were big on darts up there, and you could sit around and watch them play darts or get involved in it or read a book. Or they had a nice lounge. It's probably 75 by 75 with couches and what. Those people, they took care of their brothers down here.
PSL maintained personnel at Fort Churchill throughout the IGY. However, Fort Churchill was not the only range to launch rockets during IGY. At the same time PSL had personnel in Canada, the laboratory established a group at the fledgling Cape Canaveral range in Florida. PSL engineer Tom Noda was one of the first to move to the Cape.
Well, we were out there for about 16 or 17 years because when the Vanguard program started to have problems, that was a Naval Research Lab, the NASA took over, but the personnel remained the same. Everybody that was with NRL switched over to NASA, so it still was the same people. And then the Vanguard program, you know, it went along pretty well, so they went into the Delta program, which was really successful. And we worked on that for years.
When I first got to the Cape, there was Cocoa, Florida, and Merritt Island, Florida, and Cocoa Beach. And all three of them combined would barely make a crossroads in any major highway right now, but there were basically no hotels, no motels, no rooms, no restaurants, no roads, no facilities of any sort.
Sometimes we stayed there all night. And then we even took our sleeping bag and slept on the floor because we didn't know when we were going to run a test. You know, they were having all kinds of problems in the beginning because it was a brand new rocket. See, they took this Viking from White Sands up there. But when they started this Earth Satellite program, they started a brand new missile. It was completely different from the Viking first test. So they had to work all the bugs out. So we had all kinds of problems. And
we were primarily in the instrumentation business, the airborne instrumentation, and this was a direct outgrowth of our having been involved in a lot of the sounding rockets and with Naval Research Laboratory. And I guess at that time we were more or less the logical organization to pick up the telemetry aspect of the Vanguard launch vehicle. So that's how we were primarily involved. We worked on the packages that actually flew in the vehicle, as well as manned all of their telemetry ground stations. They had quite a few at that time. We started out working in Hangar C next to the lighthouse, and then eventually moved over to Hangar S and some other places, but there was always one or two ground stations in the primary hangar where the vehicle was assembled and checked out. There was another area called the T-pad that had as many as 5 or 6 telemetry vans, most of which were operated by PSL. And then we had downrange stations that we would send to some of the downrange tracking sites, Grand Bahamas, Grand Turk. I think there were about 13 different downrange sites that ended up at Ascension Island.
On October the 4th, 1957, the Russians stunned the world by launching Sputnik 1. On November the 3rd, 1957, they did it again with Sputnik 2. U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower demanded that the U.S. launch a baseball-sized satellite by December and a basketball-sized satellite by March of 1958.
We were under quite a bit of pressure from the very beginning to try to get this thing done, but yes, it changed. There were 7 days a week, 10, 12, 15 hours a day, sometimes week after week. I can recall on quite a few occasions that we'd go out for a major test of some sort, and we may be there 24, 30, 36 hours continuously. Of course, that was long before the days when they tried to regulate how many hours people would work, but there were a few occasions when upper management would just have to call time out and say, okay, everybody go home and rest, even though a lot of people didn't want to. They were really dedicated. They wanted to stay there, but management would actually have to force people to go home.
The first attempt by the U.S. to launch a satellite was Flight VTV-3, which blew up on the launch pad on December 6, 1957. However, Eisenhower's baseball, Explorer 1, was successfully orbited January 31, 1958. There were 2 more failed attempts after Explorer 1, but then on March 17, 1958, Vanguard 1, Ike's basketball, was successfully orbited. The U.S. was now fully into the space race, and so was PSL. Laboratory personnel remained at Cape Canaveral into the 1970s, providing telemetry support for vehicles such as Delta, Atlas, and Centaur. All in all, PSL was at the Cape for about 20 years, long enough for many PSLers to buy homes and raise families. Meanwhile, back in Las Cruces, the laboratory was rapidly increasing its work at White Sands. The early 1950s saw the beginnings of the U.S. government's efforts to develop missile warfare, and the Navy was one of the original sponsors. PSL's reputation had been built, in large measure, by its support of the Navy sounding rocket program. Therefore, it was natural for the Navy to enlist PSL's help for telemetry support on its weapons programs at White Sands. Talos is an anti-aircraft missile designed to be launched from the deck of a ship. To keep development costs down and simplify the logistics in testing missiles, the Navy established the Naval Ordnance Missile Test Facility at Wismar and built the Desert Ship. Today, more than 40 years later, PSL still provides support at this unique facility. The contract with the Navy was soon followed by others with different organizations, principally the Army. Today, a large portion of this work is with what is now known as the Armament Research, Development, and Engineering Center at Picatinny Arsenal, New Jersey. Under this contract, PSL has helped test systems ranging from ICBMs to artillery rounds. As with PSL's other contracts, telemetry support and engineering are the focus of the laboratory's work, however, with one important difference. This contract has involved what is known as high-G telemetry, where the telemeters are able to withstand accelerations up to and beyond 25,000 times the force of gravity. 2 other events occurred during the 50s and 60s that had a profound effect on PSL. One was the establishment of the student cooperative programs, and the other a contract to build and operate satellite tracking stations. Testing at White Sands grew at a furious pace. A direct consequence of this growth was a tremendous increase in the amount of film needed to be processed and reduced. To keep costs down, PSL was approached to begin a student program. This program lasted almost 40 years, involving thousands of students. At its peak, the program employed some 50 to 70 students spread over 3 shifts, performing round-the-clock